Why does everything in the new world feel so old? Oh, what's going on, guys? I am Nova. Welcome. It's another wonderful day. It's very early for me right now. I mean, not early for real people, but early for me. Was it just before 9 o'clock? I've been up since about 6 after picking them up from work at the hospital. And look, I played a little bit of New World last night, okay? It wasn't something I had planned to do, but one of my wonderful friends and moderator, Shady, decided that after hearing me talk about watching New World on Twitch in various streams, decided to buy it for me so I could try it for myself. And so I did. Myself and another friend of mine and moderator, Fox, we we hopped on in. And here's the thing. Almost everyone on my timeline for, I don't know, my goodness, it feels like months now, has to have been, at least, has been talking about New World in some way, shape, or form. And the vast majority of them have been super excited. Despite that, I hadn't really seen almost any footage or anything of the game until yesterday. And so I went in about as completely fresh as you could possibly be. And, other than having seen the Twitch streams I just mentioned. Now, before anyone gets the wrong idea and before I get lambasted because this is YouTube and we all know how that can go, there's no gameplay in this video. This is just 100% my unedited thoughts. There might be a swoop transition or something like that at some point, but otherwise this is just my unedited thoughts. And I wanted to do this as a bit of a test to see how people feel about videos like this. But regardless, that's what this video is. This is just my thoughts on what I've played so far. First 4 hours of the game. Now I know that in an MMO setting, 4 hours is, you haven't even dipped your toe in the water. In fact, you've barely breathed in the salt air from kilometers away. But I do think that 4 hours of any game, regardless of genre, should be able to do enough to hook you, give you a hook of some kind, before you, or entice you to stay, right? There's a very classic kind of mentality about MMOs specifically, although I've heard people use it in other games and genres and television shows and everything else, where it's like, you have to give it this many hours and then it gets really good, right? I've never been a big fan of that because, like I just said, at least in my opinion, I want a game or a movie or a book or whatever, if it doesn't grab me in that, reasonable time frame, which for me in a video game, somewhere between 2 and 5 hours, give or take, if it doesn't grab me there, especially since a lot of games now are only about 12 hours long anyway, you've kind of missed the boat a little bit. And I don't know if I continue to care if it gets really good at the other side. At that point, I have to go entirely based on friends or colleagues or other people that I really trust to tell me, look, it's definitely worth getting to the end, and then maybe I'll do it. But otherwise, I need that game to engage me. Like right away. I need to know what the hook is. I need to feel good about my purchase pretty early on before I feel comfortable continuing to play something, especially like an MMO. And if this wasn't in the context of me doing game reviews for, my review stuff with Critical Hit, or just playing games for my live stream, if I was, not doing this kind of content creation and I was just playing at home, that would be even more important because now I'm that's my downtime, right? So, and I only say that because I know this is a bit of an incoherent start to this. I only say that because from a content creator standpoint, sometimes it's hard to remember that not everyone is playing video games for 8, 12 hours at a time. Like some people might take time off of work when a new release happens to like cram as much time of said game in the opening days as possible, or they want to beat it really soon. They don't want spoilers, etc., etc. But by and large, most people aren't playing 8 hours, 6 hours of video games every single day like you would if it was your job or part of what you do as a content creator. And you have to learn how to separate those two things, those two viewpoints, because they do change how you might view a value proposition of a game pretty considerably, honestly. So what did I think about New World? Well, the way that I summed it up in a couple of places was kind of it's kind of like, what did I say? I think I said something along the lines of, you don't necessarily want to go to the new world, maybe just be happy with the old one. Something like that anyway. Look, if I'm going to be completely honest, and I'm known to be a pretty harsh critic in general. I like to think I'm relatively fair, but relatively harsh by most people's accounts. I guess let me just not sugarcoat anything. Visually, the game looks dated, very dated, even for an MMO. And we all know that MMOs are generally speaking, with the exceptions of maybe a handful of Korean MMOs where in the last while, like with Black Desert Online, they just threw caution to the wind and made it graphically crippling. Most MMOs are made to look pretty good stylistically, but they need to be able to account for as many computer setups as possible to canvas everything. They need this thing to run on a potato if possible. And so, visually you tend to take some hits, and that's why you often also see certain art styles take over to, aid in the fact that you can't all decide to be Black Desert Online and put every polygon into your character's face so that you can appreciate it after 2 or 3 days of creating it. With that being said, the game does not look good whatsoever, by any definition, in my opinion. They didn't strike a style that made up for the lack of visual appeal, just raw visual appeal, graphical capability. They didn't have anything that really made up for that lack. In fact, I discovered, and this is where I do wish I had taken some recordings of last night's stream, but if you watch me on Twitch, the VOD is available, I suppose. Not that it's hard to find footage on New World, which is also why I haven't bothered to put much in this video in that regard, or any. I was able to turn all of the graphics settings down to low, so it's lowest setting. And then just turn shadows up to high, and I think it was texture detail to very high or high, which is normally pretty easy for most setups, those two things. High on shadows, not too bad, and then very high on textures. And the difference between that and then having every option crammed to very high, basically couldn't see the difference. You might be able to if you screenshotted it and did side-by-sides. But otherwise, it didn't look really any different. Neither did it perform really any different, all the same. You didn't get like massive jumps in frame rate. In fact, my 5600X and my 2080 Ti at 1440p couldn't hold 120 FPS consistently, especially in more populated areas of people running around. So from a visual perspective, I wasn't particularly impressed, and things like turning up and down the shadows don't seem to do a lot in terms of shadow resolution, so much as just shadow draw distance, and the same goes for textures, as you might get a slight decrease in texture quality, but in general, it's how far away are we drawing textures, things of that nature. So, and I suspect that's probably why, 1, the performance difference isn't huge and between modes, and 2, it doesn't look all that different. Man, where do I go from there? So I wasn't impressed with the visuals whatsoever, but that's not the end of the world. As we all know, lots of people are more hung up on or put more weight on gameplay than anything, and so let's talk about that. This is a pretty straightforward action combat MMO style of game. This is not your tab targeting. Your screen doesn't look like a flight control panel for a fighter jet. You've got your attack, your block, and a couple of skills, and they're weapon-based. In fact, it's not completely dissimilar to something like, say, Guild Wars 2 in that regard. Including progression of learning weapons. It's basically based on the use of said weapon. You earn mastery through use of those things. And I like systems like that. I think those are nice. But for the combat itself, honestly, it's early game. And so everything I say here is early game. So you have to take everything here with a grain of salt within that regard. But I don't see how it gets demonstrably better with time or more engaging in time. It's just kind of a clunky, slow feeling, and again, old. The irony here is that everything in New World feels old. It felt like I went in a time machine. Strange feeling. Nothing about it felt like it was released in 2021. So the combat is in that same category. Not particularly hot. Not bad, mind you. So let me clarify that it's not that it's broken hideously that I've noticed or anything of that nature. It just doesn't feel great. There are definitely other action MMOs that do this much better, including Guild Wars or I think Terra. I get if off the top of my head from what I've played. There are other action MMOs that definitely have done this a bit better. But again, not to say it's terrible, just not great and feels old. Something else I didn't really appreciate about it related to the combat was that when you have systems like this, similar to the concept of weapon progression and skills unlocking based on use of the weapon, etc., etc. What I prefer to see is in the opening parts of the game, you are through the first several quests or whatever that you're doing, you're given all weapons in all categories, like one from each in the most basic form, for you to go ahead and use and find out what you might want to use right off the rip, so that you can start leveling it and unlocking skills and whatnot as soon as humanly possible. Because what I discovered was the first weapons that I was given anyway. And I don't know if this is different for everyone, but for me anyway, I'll just say what I got. I got a sword and shield, and so you can learn blocking and attacking in the most basic fashion, I suppose. And through the first few quests, I got everything but the weapon that I was hoping to use that I saw, and that was a spear. I got almost everything. I didn't get everything, but I got almost everything. And so that was kind of disappointing, because it meant that I was already more than several levels deep before I got to a point where I could, where I had a spear, or either, and I wasn't lucky enough to get one out of a drop. I had to craft it. And to that point, there was a quest in which you were required to craft an iron sword. And I was saying this when I was streaming. I said, why wouldn't they just say you could craft any iron weapon? Just craft an iron weapon. What do you want to use? It's early on in the game. Maybe you've got something that you want to try. Craft whatever you want. But it wasn't. It's craft an iron sword. So I had to go and get more materials to craft a spear just to be able to use the basic spear. And that sounds like a bit of a nitpicky thing, but I feel like, for me anyway, if we're still doing MMOs like this in 2021, I feel like the standard needs to be set a little higher, because everything I've seen in New World has been done before, ironically, short of maybe something like item collection, with chopping down trees and everything else, which I'll get to here shortly. Nothing is really particularly new. And so we're using a bunch of old systems and old methodologies, and this game seems to ignore a lot of the stuff that the genre has learned over time and started from scratch, and just pretended like a lot of that didn't exist in terms of the quality of life and the polish and stuff like that other games have figured out over their long lifespans, 5, 7, 8, 10 year MMO success stories. So anyway, so combat, graphics and combat, nothing to write home about. Not horrific, just really not anything better than average to below average, I guess. There is voice acting in this game. Not everything is voice acted like some MMOs you might come across, but there's a fair amount of it, and what I've heard so far is actually quite good. Really well delivered by almost every character, I think, that I've come across so far, and that was nice to see. The writing is also not completely horrific. The story isn't much more than the expected derivative stuff that you'd get from most MMOs, but what writing there has not been bad. And then, like I said, the delivery of the lines, dialogue and whatnot for the voice acting that you get is good. Music is there. It serves a purpose. I haven't heard any tracks that have blown me away. I haven't heard any tracks that are going to get stuck in my head or anything like that, but it's there and it doesn't sound awful. What else can I talk about? Well, let's talk about the item collection, shall we? The opening parts, the opening 4 hours of the game, of any game, normally it gives you an idea of what the game, especially for an MMO, is going to put weighted value on. You know, what is really, at least that's how I see games. The majority of the opening part of this game is setting you up to learn how to collect the numerous items and crafting materials that lay all over the world, whether it's flint or stone or new trees or nuts and berries and whatever else you can get your hands on. In fact, there's so much foliage in the game, and that's certainly where most of the rendering power in this game goes towards, is just rendering the copious amount of foliage everywhere. That's kind of what the game focuses on. You don't really focus much on combat. You know, they'll send you off to kill a couple things in the opening, but otherwise it's go and collect things to craft another thing that allows you to collect slightly different things that you can then craft something to collect slightly different things to then craft stuff. So I felt like I was more being placed into a would-be, survival Minecraft type experience than I was an MMO. And I know all MMOs have some form of, or most MMOs have some sort of collection and crafting basis, but this in the early game made me really feel like it was going to be a much more prominent piece than perhaps some MMOs. Whether or not that ends up being the case, I don't know, but that's the feeling that it gave me in the opening 4 hours. Beyond that, I noticed housing for sale, so that you can buy property. I don't know if this is a game where only one person can own property within a town at a time, or if it's just open to anyone and it's instanced to you. I suspect that's more likely the case. It might also be the fact, though, that there are factions in this game, so it might be that you can only perhaps own property in places that your faction currently controls at the time, or maybe your property tax goes up. I don't know if there's property tax, but there is taxes. The people have talked about it. There is some irony. An Amazon studio has cranked out a game that includes taxes. So I guess let me try and talk a little bit about this if you don't know much about it. So there not that I'm a wealth of knowledge, this is just what I know from the opening of the game. So there are 3 factions to choose from. They get you to choose your faction pretty early on. You can change it, I think it was once every 120 days. And those 3 factions more or less are, at war of sorts, over land, and you can participate in PvP type events of various kinds, and perhaps even some PvE stuff, as well, although I think this is a predominantly PvP environment, to control regions of the map and towns and fortify locations and things of that nature over time, working together within your group and then within your larger faction to accomplish this goal. And then, taxes and stuff are cheaper for those that control the region, etc., etc. It's just kind of very I don't know. Personally, I don't know if it was particularly necessary thing. It's weird seeing cents in prices. Like, instead of just 18 or 20 gold, it's like 18.50. Yo, that's just, I feel like I'm placing an order at McDonald's. Like, I'm just buying some iron, bro. I don't need cents. This is like, I don't want to feel like this is real life. But again, maybe that's just me. So yeah, there are factions. I do get the feeling, so I will say this, now that we've gotten to this point, I do get the feeling that while this game is going to have a fair amount of PvE stuff, that the vast majority of the meat and potatoes of New World will be PvP. So if you are a big PvP MMO type person, then this might end up being something that plays to your likes more than somebody like myself that errs on the side of PvE most of the time. But again, early days, and I've only played 4 hours of it. That's just the feeling that I get, which is the whole purpose of this video is my experience in the opening hours. Beyond that, my overall experience, I guess, thus far, like I said in the beginning, is just it feels and looks and sounds and everything. It just feels like a game lost in time. It feels like a game that released in 2014, 2015, in almost every way that you could measure a game. There's definitely things I'm sure that I've missed, or that obviously I haven't gotten to, that maybe separate it from the pack a bit more in that regard. But in general, that was my initial feeling, and I think that for, the most part, they're possibly lucky that they're not doing a monthly model of payment for this game, and they're just doing a similar model to Guild Wars, where you're just buying the base and then away you go, with probably expansionary stuff, and they have got some stuff in the shop, which I should talk about that too, which I'll get there. I think they're lucky in that regard, because I don't think a lot of people are going to play this for more than a month right now, if they're lucky. In my world, if you're coming here and you're new here and you've made it this far into the video, which I'm freaking want to be 22 minutes in, I've never been known to be brief. There's the fervor, I think, around this game in my community. So the content creation live streaming community. I mean, I know a lot of people are getting paid to play this game right now, but I don't think it's going to last for very long. At least that's the impression it gives me. Perhaps I'm going to be wrong. That's fine. Wouldn't be the first, won't be the last. But that's the impression it gives me. I don't see anything here that's special, that you can't get in other places done better. I think this is a slightly more granular approach to the world v world and MMO content. It's like if you took the more serious path of something like Eve, and you tried to merge it with the more horizontal and more lax Guild Wars model, I feel like that's where New World sits. If that gives you a sense, if you know those two games. That's kind of what I would describe my experience as so far. As for the shop, so there is a shop. Of course there's a shop. Wow. Nothing in there right now is good. There was some okay armor looking stuff, which at least you could visually appreciate. The weapons, the weapon skins, that hurt me to look at. There were, you're looking at weapon skins for something like a hatchet, which on your character model, you can't appreciate even a little bit. They'd have to be a lot more flamboyantly designed to be able to appreciate any weapon skin beyond what you're just picking up off the ground and using as a hatchet or a sword. The only weapon that's big enough to maybe appreciate skins, even if they're not super flamboyant, is like the hammers can get quite big. Otherwise, yeah, you're not really seeing shit. If I'm just going to be honest, you're just not seeing anything. And they're not selling for cheap. I think like a hatchet skin was like pushing $10 Canadian, and you were not seeing it. I promise you. You feel free to go check it out yourself. You're not gonna see a difference. Really appreciably. Not $10 worth anyway. You know, you're getting to like 1/4 or 1/3 of the game price for something that you can't even see. Just bumped my table, sorry. Yeah, not so hot. So there you go. I know this wasn't, I didn't even have any cuts or anything. You know what? I feel like sometimes YouTube might need some of this. You know, where you're feeling a little bit more of just like unedited stuff. I haven't walked away from the camera and came back to it and continued to talk about things after messing up. This is just my unedited thoughts on New World after playing the first, 3 to 4 hours of the game. If that was helpful to you in any way, shape, or form, you found it interesting, hit the like button. Leave me a comment below. What's your experience been with New World thus far? I'll be back with whatever content comes to mind in the not too distant future. So if you want more of that, subscribe, hit the bell icon. All of my socials, of course, are in the description box below. Thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it. Have fun out there, whether you're playing New World or not. And until I see you guys on the next one, peace.